All right, everybody. So, let me tell you what we're doing now. I guess you can figure it out, can't you? We are checking the audio. So if you can tell me if the audio is okay, we're ready to start. All right. Okay, the audio is great. Hello. Yeah, we can hear you. Okay. All right, everybody. So we are ready to begin. This is a huge one. Choices have consequences. All right. So let's begin. All right, ready? Made volume loud and clear. Okay. 5. Excuse me. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the last spotlight for March. Can you believe it? What is the actual date today? I want to be sure I'm on the... No, it's not the last spotlight in March. It's the... We have one more. Okay, I'm going to start over again, guys. We have one more. This is the 4th spotlight. All right, ready? I'm going to start again. Okay. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the 4th spotlight in March. And this one is crucial. Choices have consequences. Now, before we begin full time, I want to just tell you that a lot of people have been commenting and emailing me and social messaging. Where are the UFO photographs and the videos that we took when I went to the beach and to that remote location to the wilderness? And I had the camera set up, and that was a live stream, and I was showing you how to set up the camera. So I want to tell you what happened with that. We got the footage, and we did indeed put them on the computer. Yep, the computer that's right there. And we did process them, and in fact, we found a whole bunch of UFOs. Trouble is, you never know what you're going to get anytime you go. These particular UFOs were really small, and that meant they were really high. Now, how do we know that they're UFOs or UAPs and not birds? Well, that's because first of all, they have no wings. And through serious research that I have done here at Farsight, we have determined that all birds and bugs have wings when they fly, and these have no wings. But the other thing is they travel at enormous speeds. Now, one of the best ways to see what speed they're going at is in terms of body lengths per second. Body lengths per second. So rather than saying miles per hour or kilometers per hour, body lengths per second. So you look at the object and you see how wide it is, how long it is, and you see how many body lengths it travels in a second. And these were in the thousands. And the fastest bug that exists is like 200 body lengths per second, and the fastest speed. Most birds are way under 100. So these UFOs were traveling really, really, really fast. So that's how we know that they're artificial, because no biological life form can travel at that speed, and any biological life form up there has to have wings. But they were small and they were high. So I have lots of footage taken over the years of similar situations where the UFOs are clearly there, and they're darting in all different directions like they typically do. And so I know that they are what they are, but when I show a UFO or UAP to an audience, I like it to stand out. I like it to be low, closer to the ground, and doing some aerobatics or acrobatics that are sort of unusual. Now, if you go to my Instagram page, Courtney Brown Farsight, all one word, Courtney Brown Farsight, you can see a bunch of the ones that really do stand out. And those are ones where you can actually see them. They're low to the ground, they're flying like a bat out of hell, and they're really great to look at. And they're not the ones that are really small dots up in the sky really far. So anyway, we always get UFOs whenever we use infrared and 120 frames a second and process it. So we always get UFOs, but to show them to you, it wouldn't be something to write home about. They were there, they were clear, but they weren't like close. So I'm going to be going to the live streams again to show you other UFOs. I'm going to be doing this again, recording again, and on a repeated basis, and you'll see it will always get something. But if you want me to sort of show it to you so you see your eyes pop out, go to my Instagram page, Courtney Brown Farsight, and you can see those out of zillions of UFOs that I've video recorded. You can see that those ones really pop out, especially when you look at the one, for example, over Pensacola Naval Air Base, where you see 4 Blue Angel jets, and the UFO is passing right past them like a bat out of hell, so to speak. I mean, that really stood out. And there was a cigar-shaped UFO that was over my house in Atlanta, and it went over the house a number of times, and it passed a Delta jet. It passed a big jet, and the jet was like standing still while the thing just zoomed by. So those are ones that really stand out. You can see the shape, you can see the configuration. So those are really good. So anyway, with regard to the ones we took at the Wilderness, if I had done it like 2 or 3 times in the afternoon or in the morning, we would have gotten something that was big enough to see, sort of something to write home about. But I'm going to be doing it on a regular basis, but I wanted to tell you what happened. We always get something. But is it something that you should sort of have your eyes pop out with? Or is it something that you just say, yeah, it's there, clear as day, but it's not something to write home about type of thing? Anyway, so that's what happened to that. So now we're ready to begin with the topic of today. Hope you're ready for it, because this is affecting everybody. So here we go. Choices have consequences. So right now, if you listen carefully to what people are saying across the world, something has changed. Obviously, something has changed. There have always been conflicts in the world, but the current war in the Middle East involving Iran, Israel, and the United States is like no other war before it. And it is turning out exactly as we have long predicted in our many Farsight projects. with special emphasis on our deep news projects. Now, I hear some internet commentators making projections, what it's going to be like for a year out, 2 years out, 3 years out, up to 5 years out. They don't know what they're talking about. They're looking at just the stuff on the ground, just the stuff in the news, and trying to make a projection out. They're not making a full understanding of the deep picture involving the extraterrestrials who are involved in all of these conflicts. So our predictions, our descriptions of the backstory is way more important and much more relevant to your understanding of what's going to come, what's going to happen, than anything you're currently seeing on the internet right now. Internet commentators are starting to interview those who made correct general predictions leading to this moment, meaning they said there will be a war in the future or things like that. But those predictions were based on generalities, however insightful they may be. Again, but the Farsight predictions have been detailed, really detailed, down to where and when the bombs would hit, to the evolving psychologies of the opposing leaderships. Like when you look at the leaders, we went into the heads of the leaders so you could understand that. You can't get that anywhere else. The major internet podcasters have not yet asked me or anyone at Farsight to discuss our results, probably due to the newness of our methodologies, but that will change eventually as our predictions accumulate one after another until it can no longer be ignored that remote viewing, when done by highly trained specialists working under totally blind and scientifically defensible conditions, aim at a problem and nail it. But still, the language of the internet news commentators is changing radically. So that's good. And the expanding war is changing the framing of existence itself. People are no longer talking about stability. Now they're talking about duration. How long is this thing going to last? And they're talking about escalation. That's a big change. They are talking about a world that will not return to what it was. And you hear it everywhere. And this is going to last for a long time. And this changes everything. The world will never be the same. And I want to point out something. The internet commentators are never really talking about anything happening within the continental United States, but we have. So when that happens, and when you see these things starting to happen inside the continental United States, just remember, we told you it was coming long ago, and we told you how it would happen and what would be involved in something. So just keep that in mind when those internet commentators come out and say, so this is what we're saying, this is what we're predicting. Yeah, so anyway. But in the world that they're talking about, something is missing. No one is asking the most important question. Not what is happening. That's not the most important question. But what people are going to choose when they realize what is happening. That's the big question. Because that moment is coming, and when it comes, the future will not be determined by governments. It will be determined by the psychology of human choice. And most people believe that they make choices. But in reality, most people react to structures that were built around them long before they were born. Family structures, cultural structures, media structures, educational systems. These systems do not just inform people, they shape the boundaries of what people believe is possible to choose. So when a crisis happens, people do not suddenly become free. They fall back on the only patterns that they know. Fear, authority, conformity. In other words, what looks like a choice is often just conditioned reaction. So, to put this, to put this into a new perspective, to make it hit, I want to pivot now and talk about sex. Specifically, I want to talk about sex in the context of a relationship that is doomed to failure. but which continues anyway. I want to talk about what drives people to self-destruct. And sex is a process that both drives and illustrates this dysfunctionality amazingly well. And of course, I want to draw upon some of my own personal experiences, not in terms of me having sex, but in terms of how I saw how sex welded people together into a unit that was doomed from the start. Something that just about everyone else could see would self-destruct, but which the lovers could not see. You'll see. This is going to be very relevant to the topic today. So, this is a story about how a woman who I loved chose another man. Now, to be honest, this story has happened to me more than once. So, it will not be possible to know which woman I am talking about, even if the woman in question is hearing what I am saying. So, some necessary anonymity is being preserved. This woman had a child with this other man, but the man was the perfect description of a failure as a partner and father. And you will pardon me if I spare you the details of his personal troubles, but there were many. He may have had a nice personality, which the woman clearly liked, but he offered absolutely no support to the woman. Aside from some occasional short-term babysitting, he had no job, no employment history, no money, no car, no future that would not involve less than legal activities, to say the least. Everyone needs a way to function in the world. Everyone. Everyone needs a path that sustains life. And I could not see any path for him that led anywhere stable. The only career options I could see for her boyfriend are stealing, selling drugs, or pimping. Nothing else. And for a woman to be close to a man who may one day turn to pimping is very dangerous. But the woman loved him, and no one could figure out why she loved him. So choosing him over me made no sense on a logical level, but it was what it was. And choices have consequences. All choices have consequences. And for whatever reason, she could not direct her life by seeing the consequences of her choices. I still helped her financially, even as I watched her walk day after day, ever closer to the edge of a cliff from which there was no saving if she took one step too many. I just hoped she would snap out of it before it was too late. She was clearly about to crash and burn, but she seemed unable to turn in a different direction. My words of warning simply bounced, and the words of warning of others around her bounced. So I'm turning to this story for understanding now, because it so closely matches the state of the world at this very moment, and you'll understand it when I explain it. Do not think that this is a story about a lady. It is a story about of an entire planet, a story that will have choices and consequences, and there will be suffering and lives lost as a result of those consequences. Now, the world is literally walking towards a cliff, and I do not see any internet commentators coming up with a solution that could turn the situation around given the current state of world events. It seems like the crash and burn for the entire planet is simply going to happen, even though it has not yet fully happened. And just about everyone can see that the outcome is not going to look very nice. So I see now that watching my old girlfriend is something I witness at the level of the entire planet. Now, civilizations behave the exact same way as individuals. They do not fail because they are surprised. They fail because they continue anyway. They move towards outcomes that are predictable. They are warned. And they are shown alternatives. And they still continue. Over the years, I have had the good fortune to become well acquainted with a number of police officers who worked the streets. They have lots of interesting stories to tell. And one of the discussions that I had with some of my police officer friends addressed the question of why the ladies who they eventually arrested for soliciting did not simply see that their pimps were controlling them, and why they didn't simply leave the pimps and run away. And the police friends were always quite reflective in their understanding of the psychology of these ladies. So when you see stories about the police on TV or on the social media, you don't always see what's inside the heads of these police. Police officers think deep. They are very affected by the stuff that they interact with on the street. So first, these police officer friends, they told me that nearly all of the women started out as strippers in the clubs. Legal strippers in the clubs with licenses. And absolutely all of the women were certain that they would legally work in the strip clubs for only a short period of time, and then they would move on to something more respectable, some more respectable work. But financial pressures built, and there were always situations that would arise where some extra money is needed, almost always to help a sibling or someone else, someone close. And sometimes the strippers would have one or more children, and psychologically they would do anything to help their babies. So eventually a day would come when a person in the club requested a private dance session, usually in their house or apartment. And in that private dance session, the request would be made to add real sex for some extra cash. And they would accept, saying it was only a one-time thing and they would never do it again. But the contingencies did not stop coming. Worse still, those who saw that she could get money through whatever means would ask her for money again. And each request would be filled with emotional tugs that could make a stone statue cry. So sex for money became a repeated experience. And then came the pimps. So my police friends told me that the pimps would be on the lookout for such distressed ladies. Now, such activities can be dangerous, and the pimps approach their lady prospects offering friendship and protection. And always, the pimps work to gain the trust of the ladies to the point of where they had sex with them. And that is what the pimps use to cement their psychological hold on the ladies. The pimps knew that sex would psychologically bond the woman to them, especially if repeated often, and even if a child resulted in it. Because if they have a woman who has a child, that's an extra bond they have with that woman to be able to manipulate her. So they made sure that sex happened daily, over and over, until the mental hold on the women was secure. So this process was grooming for sure, and it was well planned out, a system of manipulation that was as practiced as it was successful. And oddly, the women could never figure out that the men who they thought was in love with them was just looking at them as an economic tool. These police all said those women actually thought the pimps loved them. They actually thought the guys loved them, especially the guys that had nothing to offer the women. They actually thought, because of the sex, that the guys really cared. They didn't see that the guys didn't care. They were just waiting their time, keeping the bond strong until they could finally control her permanently. And when my police friends arrested the ladies, they would temporarily break the cycle, giving the woman a moment of hope to a new life. That's what happened when the ladies went to prison. They got patched together, fixed up, and they were sort of okay. But then they'd be released, and the pimps knew the cycle really well, and they waited for the women to be released from prison so that they could immediately pounce on them and regain their mental hold. And sex was the engine that powered that relationship of enslavement. And my police friends knew that they would sadly arrest the ladies again one day as the cycle continued. Well, Now, with respect to my old girlfriend, she was not a stripper or a prostitute, but she had this boyfriend who seemed to me to be an aspiring pimp, and she could not see it. Now, in my view, an aspiring pimp is someone who has basically no other means of income, and he uses sex to pull the woman into a relationship, sometimes using a child to further attach the woman to him. And the woman doesn't see it. He tries to be friendly and occasionally helpful, but he never offers real support that would relieve the financial pressures on the woman. In fact, the aspiring pimp is hoping that the pressures continue to the point where he can finally suggest that he can protect her if she chooses to have sex with a customer. And he can then offer her protection and even some help managing the customers. The woman, desperate to support her child, finds herself under his influence. Even though she thinks she is independent, she doesn't realize that her mind has changed and she is no longer independent. In fact, she has not realized that the act of sex was that which began the binding process that prevented her from seeing her boyfriend as a manipulator rather than a true boyfriend. She could not see what everyone else could see. The chemistry of emotions resulting from sex blinded her, and she did not lose her intelligence. She lost her ability to see clearly. And that's way different. So what I eventually realized is that what I was watching was not random. It was not stupidity. And it was not even really emotion. It was a system. And psychologists have been studying this system for a very long time. In essence, the question remains, why could the woman not simply think logically and choose a man who would give her more happiness and success in life? What happened to her cognitive abilities? Why did the emotions ramped up by sexual dopamine kill her ability to navigate her own future more clearly? And when you look at what psychologists have discovered, something very unsettling becomes clear. This is often thought of as a situation where they symbolically marry their parent or childhood caregiver. And this does not mean that a person would literally marry or have an intimate relationship with a real physical parent or caregiver. Rather, they would choose someone who has much of the same dysfunctionality as their parent or caregiver. So I want to go through a few psychologists that have talked about this directly. And we're going to start with Sigmund Freud, okay? Now, this is called repetition compulsion. Freud was the first to formalize this via the term repetition compulsion. He observed that people often repeat traumatic or distressing situations from their past in their current lives. The theory, in the context of relationships, is like this. A person might choose a partner who embodies apparent negative traits, emotional coldness, or perhaps volatility. The goal was that Freud believed this was an unconscious attempt to master the original trauma, to resolve it. By recreating the dynamic with a new person, the individual hopes for a different outcome this time and seeking the approval or love that they never received from the original parent. That's the goal. Well, there's another psychologist, Harville Hendrix. He had a really interesting insight. He called it imago relationship theory. It's a weird name. That's what he called it. Perhaps the most direct theorist to address this is Harville Hendrix, and he developed this imago relationship theory in the 1980s. Now, imago, Hendrix argued that everyone carries an imago, or you might consider it like an image, a subconscious composite image of the positive and negative traits of their primary caregivers in their head, this image. And then there's a selection process. He theorized that we are naturally drawn to people who match this imago, or image, specifically the negative traits. Now, the logic of it is like this. If your father was distant, you may marry a distant man because your subconscious perceives this as unfinished business of your life. So you are trying to get a distant person to finally love you so that your childhood wound can heal. Now, there were two other theorists that were really interesting, John Bowlby and Mary Ainsworth, independently. They came up with something that we can start, actually they had different names for it, but one was a attachment theory. So while this is not specifically about marrying your parent, attachment theory explains the mechanics of how these dysfunctions are transmitted across generations. It works like this. There's an internal working, has a model, and Bowlby proposed that a child develops an internal working model based on their relationship with their primary caregiver. And this serves as a blueprint for all future relationships. And then there's a cycle. If a child has an insecure or disorganized attachment with the parent, they view that dysfunctional style as the standard definition of intimacy. And consequently, they gravitate for partners who reinforce that familiar, although very painful, attachment style. Now, there's another theorist, Alice Miller, very interesting person. And we can call the idea that she had as the drama of the gifted child. So, Alice Miller was a psychoanalyst who focused heavily on how childhood trauma and parental narcissism are repressed and then acted out in adulthood. So, there's a generational transmission. And she argued that children who had to suppress their own needs to satisfy a parent's dysfunctional needs would grow up to find partners who demand the exact same self-sacrifice. And the result? Well, it creates a repetition where the individual continues to play the role of the caregiver or victim, eventually passing these behaviors down to their own children. And over it goes. So these psychologists that I just talked about, they give us insight into how dysfunctionality can pass generationally. And in such situations, when a woman attaches herself to a dysfunctional man and rejects the attention of a functional man, it may have nothing to do with the logic of the situation, and there may be nothing wrong with the dysfunctional man. The root problem is that the woman may have an internal mental script that works like a computer program to result in a particular outcome regardless of what the external logic of the situation is. So what we are really looking at here is something deeper than behavior, way deeper than behavior. We're looking at the psychology of choice. Why do people choose what destroys them? Let me repeat that. Why do people choose that which destroys them? Why do they walk towards outcomes that are obvious to everyone else? And why, when they reach the edge, do they still not turn? They walk over the edge and crash. And that is the problem of choice and the ability of people to make choices, or rather, the inability of people to make choices that seem logically more aligned with their own self-interest. What makes people self-destruct? Now remember that all choices have consequences. What we want to focus on is why people cannot see that they need to make different choices in order to avoid the most unwanted consequences. Why do people make choices that nearly everyone else can see will lead to self-destruction? That is, when people approach the wilderness and that's what the planet's doing right now, why do they not stop and consider the consequences of their next actions? So, when we ask these questions, we have to consider the idea that within many or all people, there are internal mental programs running all the time, almost like an operating system of a computer. And this is just as relevant to mass behavior as with individual behavior. It's the same thing. So when dealing with the masses, we are just scaling upward. We're not changing any of the fundamental components of the psychological model. So my discussion of the woman makes total sense with respect to what's happening on the entire planet. So when we are having a mental operating system working on the level of the masses, what do we need to break the behavioral pre-programmed lock? Now, in computer terms, this is not just software. It's an operating system. And the operating system does not change just because you want it to. It only changes when it crashes, and you all know that. You don't change something on the computer till it crashes. And it will always be the same, whether one is dealing with an individual or a group, large or small. As long as the mental operating system produces a result that allows one to continue along a pre-established path, the person or group will continue along that pre-established path. And this will continue until there is a fundamental breakdown in the way that operating system works. And the breakdown needs to be so complete that no command or instruction that exists within that operating system can resolve the issue. You just can't fix it by typing something. And the resulting problem needs to be so completely disastrous that the person or group is forced to pivot. And only the wilderness is powerful enough to accomplish this. And there is no guarantee that the pivot will result in a positive outcome. No guarantee. It is just that a positive outcome is impossible without the pivot. So you need the pivot, but once you have it, you have to say, well, okay, what choices are you going to make now that you finally have an ability to make a choice that's independent of the operating system? So the wilderness changes one thing above all else. It removes the structure that tells people how to think. That's what happens. And when that happens, something very unusual occurs. People experience what feels like freedom. So the crash and burn, entering the wilderness, actually is a step towards freedom because you're releasing yourself from the structure of that operating system. But psychologically, it does not feel like freedom. It feels like confusion, anxiety, disorientation. Because for the first time, they have to choose without a script. Now, in terms of my police friends and the ladies, the pimps produced a script. That's right. The pimps were producing a script. A bad script, for sure, but a script. And the script is a plan. And when a person is in a confused state, a plan in front of you is the only plan that you see. And most people are not prepared for that. Most people are not prepared to look away from the plan that is right in front of their face. So when you enter the wilderness and you're forced to pivot, you have to realize that you're going to see the original plan, but you're going to have to also at that moment see an alternative plan. That's the role of Farsight, to offer the alternative plan. And when making choices, people do not normally experience freedom at that moment that they're making those choices, and they certainly do not experience liberation due to the ability to choose. The freedom to choose is not experienced as liberation at first. It is experienced as uncertainty. So let me now address the topic of the extraterrestrials, a topic that has driven a great deal of Farsight research. As you know, here at Farsight, we often talk about the good ETs and the bad ETs. Now, the bad ETs are an authoritarian group who have formal written agreements with the United States government and some other governments to operate in the Earth environment in exchange for weapons tech transfer. And the good ETs are free will absolutists, and they can only assist humanity if there is a free will request, however imperfect, from the masses to ask for such assistance. Again, I have talked about this at length many times elsewhere, and I'm not going to repeat the details here other than to say that the bad ETs use wars and other calamities as a means of keeping humanity off balance so that no one can be calm enough, long enough to figure out what is going on. So, to connect our discussion now to my own personal experiences that I just mentioned, the bad ETs can be considered as parallel to the pimps that control their women. And over the course of a great many highly emotional interactions with cooperating Earth humans, control is maintained. But the good ETs have managed to manipulate the current set of crises such that they all happen at the same time. That's why you see it all happening now all over the world at the same time, making a perfect storm that overloads the control systems that's run by the bad ETs, which causes humanity to enter the wilderness. At that moment, when the structure breaks, well, people face two fundamentally different types of choice. Let's go over them. First, there's the regressive choice. That has a bad ET alignment, and that's when people choose safety over truth, authority. Safety over truth, authority over autonomy, and structure over freedom. Let's go through that again. They choose safety over truth. You get that? And they choose authority over autonomy. And they choose structure over freedom. And what they look for is, who will tell me what to do? This is a psychology that sustains control systems. Now, let's go over the alternate, which is the expansive choice, and this is a good ET alignment. So, with respect to the good ET stuff, people choose uncertainty over illusion, autonomy over control, and responsibility over dependency. And let's go through that again. As far as the good ETs are concerned, people are going to be choosing uncertainty over illusion. They're going to be choosing autonomy over control. And they're going to be choosing responsibility, their own responsibility, over dependency. So they ask, what is actually true? That's what happens. They say, what's actually true? What do I want to become? Not what should I do, but what do I want to become? And this is the psychology of free will. Not asking what should I do, but what do I want to become? But when the control system collapses and humanity enters the wilderness, an opportunity arises when people will no longer ask what is true. Rather, they have the chance to ask, which side am I supposed to be on? Does everyone realize the significance of that change? When the real question is not whether people will have a choice. The real question is not whether people will have a choice. The real question is, what side am I supposed to be on? Because they will have a choice. They will have a choice. The question is whether they will recognize that they are making a choice. Because when the system collapses and the script disappears and no one is telling them what to think, that is the moment when a real choice begins. And most people will not see it. They will look for another script. They're going to look for another authority. They're going to look for another structure to follow. They will look for the guidance of a metaphorical pimp, the pimp script. But a smaller number of people will stop, and they will hesitate, and for the first time they will ask, what is actually true? That is the moment everything changes. Friends, let me end now by returning to my old girlfriend one final time. I had a conversation with her where she expressed her regret that she had an unhappy childhood with no constant father figure in the home. Now, she knew that she would have benefited from that. And then she added that she never went to a family reunion, something that she really dearly wanted. A family that stayed together long enough to have a reunion. That was success in her eyes. That was something worth living for, a family reunion. And I had to admit that, I have to now admit that I had a tear in my eye when she mentioned that. At that very moment, she had a man in her life who would guarantee that such a family reunion would never happen. She would have to see this by herself, and no one could do that for her. And then she would have to make a choice that would have consequences. You see, the wilderness does not force people to choose. It reveals whether they ever could choose. Remember that this talk is not about a woman. It's about you and me and everyone on the planet. It is a spotlight on the future where humanity will be given an opportunity to make a choice. And then we will see if humanity ever could make a genuinely free will decision about the future they want to live in. And that possibility has always been there. It was never removed. It was only hidden. If humanity can do this, then we will emerge from the other side of the wilderness, and we will see a world at peace. And we will also then all look at one another and have our own planet-wide family reunion. That's our goal. A family reunion. Well, friends, that's what I wanted to talk with you about today. And looks like we have a great turnout today. And I hope this was a significant message to tell you. And I want to say that we are now at the final stages of reconfiguring our entire Mysteries video editing arrangement so that we can catch up with all the sessions we have. We have a ton of sessions for amazing mysteries that we're going to be doing, but we had to come up with a different means of editing them so that it can be done economically with respect to time, and we're right there now. So this is a very auspicious moment for us as an institute, because we have the ability to beat everybody out there in terms of really amazing content. And we just had to have the ability to edit it in a way that can get it done in time. And so we are finally there. I have to admit that Aziz was the one who figured out the way to do it. He loves computers. He loved figuring out how to do this automated in a way that really is impactful. It's really quite complicated, more complicated than you can ever imagine. Anyway, I hope you all sign up for our free newsletter that you can find on our website, farsight.org. And if you subscribe, I hope you do subscribe to our streaming service, farsightprime.com. That's where you get everything. That's the library that humanity is going to have to look at to be able to make their choice. When and after emerging from the wilderness, that library is it. So all of you who are watching what's the content of farsightprime.com now will be greatly used as an instructors to help the rest of humanity guide their way through that library. It's super important. All right, everybody. I love you all. And I will see you all again in 1 week. And you'll be seeing other stuff coming out during the week, of course. But see you next week in the next spotlight, which will be the final spotlight for March. And then we move on into April. All right, everybody. Take care.
Thank you.